Hey guys, tonight we begin with the grim, dangerous, and not so glamorous world of medieval assassins. Those shadowy figures who crept through castle halls and darkened alleys to change history with a blade and a whisper. While Hollywood makes them look cool, the truth is, being a medieval assassin seriously sucked. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's be clear, no one in medieval times woke up and said, "You know what? I'd like to stab a nobleman in the throat for 12 silver coins and the honour of hiding in a barrel for 3 days." Becoming an assassin wasn't a career path. It was more like a last stop on the life went horribly wrong train. Most medieval assassins weren't mysterious loners trained in mountaintop temples. They were desperate peasants, disgraced soldiers, ex-thieves with decent aim, or people so far off society's radar they could kill a man and still not be noticed in the census. If you were well off, you didn't become an assassin. You hired one. If you had a title, land, or even a goat to your name, you were in management. But if you'd just escaped debtor's prison, had a reputation for solving problems, and could sneak into a tavern without being seen, congratulations. Someone, somewhere, was about to slide a coin purse across the table and whisper a name, and that name wasn't a fun one. You weren't asked to take out Bob the quiet turnip farmer. It was usually a corrupt baron, a bishop with too much gold, or someone with 12 bodyguards and a moat. The pay? Tempting. The job? Horrifying. But by the time someone considered it, they had nothing left to lose. No family, no future, and definitely no dental plan. Plus, let's not forget the absolute lack of job perks. No pension, no glory, no evenings off. You couldn't exactly hang up a shingle that said, "Quiet eliminations by appointment." You just had to stay quiet, move fast, and never ever tell anyone what you did for a living, especially not loudly over ale at the inn. "Oh yeah, I'm a travelling carpet seller. The stains? Die." So yes, nobody dreamed of being a medieval assassin. They landed there because the world chewed them up and spat them out wearing a hood and holding a rusty dagger. You weren't the hero. You weren't even the villain. You were the footnote that made everyone nervous, and probably didn't live to enjoy the coin. Let's burst the first myth wide open. Medieval assassins didn't train under candlelight in some hidden monastery, with wise mentors and inspirational flute music in the background. There was no montage, no teacher, no pep talk. If you learned anything, it was by not dying the first few times you tried. Most assassins weren't trained professionals. They were desperate amateurs with a decent sense of direction and the ability to climb quietly without sneezing. If you had military experience, great. That meant you knew how to hold a knife properly. If not, well, stabbing someone is fairly intuitive, but escaping afterward with both kidneys still intact, that takes skill. Or luck. Usually just luck. There were no manuals, no guild orientation meetings, no safety briefings. You didn't get taught how to spot a body double or where nobles keep their bedroom exits. You figured it out while hanging from a windowsill wondering if you just crept into the servants' quarters again. Poison? That was trial and error, with heavy emphasis on error. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes your target just got mildly dizzy and more suspicious of his soup. Sometimes you drank the wrong cup. There was no medieval poison control hotline. Just hope, herbal guesswork, and a strong stomach. Sure, if you were lucky, and I mean lottery lucky, you might have picked up some skills from thieves or mercenaries. Maybe an older assassin showed you how to walk without squeaking on cobblestones. But mentoring wasn't standard. It was rare and short-lived, because assassins don't retire, they disappear. Weapons training? Forget it. You weren't carrying a broadsword. You had a dagger you stole off a guard, maybe a garrote if you were feeling fancy, and whatever else fit under your cloak without jingling. So no, you weren't some shadowy martial arts master. You were a guy with calloused hands, quiet footsteps, and a deeply unhealthy relationship with alleyways. Success didn't come from training. It came from survival. You learned how to kill by doing it. Quickly, sloppily, then vanishing before anyone could sketch your face and tack it to a church door. In short, your education was brutal, practical, and offered zero graduation ceremonies. Just bruises, bloodstains, and the creeping realization that you were very much on your own. Let's talk about why you became an assassin in the first place. Coin. Cold, heavy, jangly, deliciously spendable coin. The promise of it is what got you into this. But the reality? You got paid in lies. When someone hires an assassin, they don't want a long-term relationship. They want a one-time service, no paperwork, and ideally no witnesses, including you. They offer you a pouch of silver, half now, half when the job is done. That's if they're feeling generous. But here's the thing. When the job is done is code for after we verify you didn't mess it up, or make us look bad, or leave a trail that leads back to us, or survive long enough to tell anyone about it. So, you do the job. You sneak through shadows, risk your life. Maybe kill a baron in his sleep. Not pretty, not poetic. And when you return... Ah, yes, about that payment. The client fled, terribly sorry. Or worse, they try to kill you. A knife to the gut is cheaper than a bonus. And even when you do get paid, it's never quite enough. Not for the risk, not for the blood, not for the 3 days you spent hiding in a haystack with fleas and moral regret. You get a handful of coins, a curt nod, and a reminder, you were never here. Also, fun fact, some contracts were fake, political traps. You'd be told to assassinate someone dangerous, only to find out it was a decoy with guards waiting. Congratulations, you just walked into a sting operation with your name already carved on the gallows. And even when the deal was real, you couldn't exactly go to court and file a complaint. Your Honour, I'd like to sue Lord Edmund for breach of assassin contract. The only court you'd see was the one where you were the exhibit, so you learned to take what you could, demand payment up front, and trust absolutely no one. Not even the greasy little scribe who swore this job would change your life. It did, mostly by shortening it. Being an assassin meant living on broken promises and vanishing before they broke you. So you've taken the job. You've been lied to about the pay. You're probably going to die. Now let's talk gear. Forget the fantasy novels and sneaky video games. There were no retractable wrist blades, smoke bombs, enchanted daggers, or crossbows that folded neatly into your boot. Your toolkit consisted of whatever you could steal, sharpen, or hide beneath a tattered cloak without clanking. If you were lucky, and I mean found a gold coin in a dead man's shoe, lucky, you had a good dagger. Not ornate, not curved like a dragon's tooth, just sharp, hopefully rust-free, and ideally one that didn't smell like the last guy you stabbed with it. Poison. It existed, sure, but it wasn't as glamorous as a slow drip into a wine goblet. Most medieval poisons were unpredictable, made from plants, minerals, or toad guts. Some worked instantly. Some took hours. Some made your victim vomit for 2 days and then recover, angrier and now very suspicious of stew. Ropes, occasionally useful. You could strangle, climb, or tie something up with one, but you'd better know how to use it fast, because nothing kills the mood like trying to wrestle someone while muttering, "Wait, which knot goes under again?" Bows. Effective, yes, if you had one, knew how to shoot it, and weren't trying to smuggle it through a palace disguised as a flower arranger. Most assassinations were up close and personal. No time for elegant marksmanship. Just quick, quiet, and hopefully not messy enough to slip in. And you didn't get backups. If your blade bent, broke, or fell down a well, time to improvise. Slate roof tile? Maybe. Rusty nail? Worth a shot. Shoe buckle with intent? Desperate times. You carried your tools hidden in hems, boots, or inside hollowed-out bread if needed, and you kept them close. not for safety, but because in this line of work, your weapon was your best friend, your boss, and your only retirement plan. There were no upgrades, no tinkering with gear between missions. You didn't polish your kit. You prayed it didn't betray you mid-strike. Because in the end, it wasn't the weapon that did the killing. It was you. Alone, poorly equipped, and expected to perform miracles with a spoon and a prayer. Assassins weren't hired to take out random drunks in back alleys. No one paid you to stab Jeff, the sleepy candle maker. Your targets were important. Nobles, bishops, military officers, sometimes even royalty. And those people, they were very hard to kill. First, there were the guards, not one or two, dozens. Armed, armoured, and well-fed. Some guarded the front, some the back. Some just stood there looking intimidating, daring you to blink wrong. You'd spend days memorising patrol patterns, door creaks, and exactly how many stairs it took before the knight with asthma needed a breather. Second, there were walls. Castles didn't have front porches. They had gatehouses, murder holes, and moats full of things that bite. If you didn't fall into the water, you still had to worry about arrow slits and boiling oil. Yes, boiling oil. Your job description included may get flambéed for peeking. Third, there were the servants and staff, the cooks, scribes, and stable boys. One wrong look from you, and they'd be whispering to the guard captain faster than you could say, "I'm just the herbalist." Assassins weren't just fighting swords, they were fighting gossip. And medieval gossip travels at light speed, if it means someone gets to keep their head. And finally, your actual target? Paranoid. Rightfully so. These people were surrounded by backstabbers, relatives with claims to their titles, and 36 people pretending to like them. They didn't eat without a tester. They didn't sleep without 3 locks on the door. Some even slept in decoy beds or rotated rooms like a deadly version of musical chairs. And don't get excited if you hear they're attending a feast. Yes, they'll be drunk, but so will you. And you'll still have to get past the royal guards, 3 dogs, a very alert jester, and 50 witnesses holding tankards. Even getting close to your target could take weeks, posing as a servant, bribing a chambermaid, hiding in barrels. And when the moment finally came, you had one shot. One precise, perfect, non-squeaky, non-bloody, ghost vanish in the night moment. Or you'd become the next public deterrent, swinging from the castle gate with a sign that read, "Nice try." Let's be honest. When you picture a medieval assassin, you probably imagine sleek black robes, leather braces, maybe a mysterious hood billowing in the moonlight. Reality? You looked like a sick goat herder with something to hide. Disguises in the Middle Ages weren't exactly high fashion. You didn't have custom-tailored cloaks or retractable armour. You had whatever you could scavenge. Peasant rags, a monk's robe 2 sizes too big, or the remains of a guard uniform that definitely still smelled like its previous owner. The goal was to blend in, but blending in meant looking like everyone else who hadn't bathed in 2 weeks, limped from old injuries, and had a nervous twitch from malnutrition. You didn't look suspicious because of your cloak. You looked suspicious because you kept adjusting your belt to hide a dagger wrapped in cheesecloth. And forget masks. There were no Guy Fawkes options. Most face coverings just made you look like a leper, which was great for avoiding conversation, but terrible for entering parties. If anyone asked who you were, you had to think fast. "I'm Brother Tobias. I take care of silent prayer and rooftop maintenance." Even assuming you made it past the guards, noble households weren't full of idiots. Servants noticed unfamiliar faces, especially ones that fumbled chamber pots and couldn't name the cook's cat. You were always one, "I've never seen you before," away from being clubbed with a candlestick. And if your disguise did work, congratulations. You now had to stay in character for hours while pretending not to notice all the very stab-worthy people wandering by. Also, wigs. They didn't exist. If you needed to look older or younger, you were stuck smearing dirt on your face, squinting, and hoping no one got close enough to notice that your beard was glued on with honey. The truth was, your disguise didn't protect you. It gave you maybe 5 minutes of confusion. After that, you had to be gone, invisible, or very, very convincing. And if anyone saw through it, well, let's just say no one wants to be the assassin caught in the bishop's laundry room, wearing a nun's habit and holding a sword. Especially not on a feast day. In medieval times, if you were an assassin, you didn't have a team. You didn't have a sidekick with a crossbow, a clever alchemist in a secret lair, or a handler who gave you coded scrolls and warm encouragement. You had you, a rusty dagger, and crippling trust issues. There were no guilds, at least not ones you could actually count on, and if there were whispers of a brotherhood of assassins, it was mostly tavern talk, fueled by mead and boredom. You were more likely to meet a ghost than another professional killer who wanted to network. Why the isolation? Because in your business, the fewer people who knew you existed, the longer you lived. Every contact was a risk, every loose tongue a potential noose. Even your client might not know your real name. And if they did, you were already planning your exit. Companionship? Laughable. Friends asked questions. Lovers noticed bruises, bloodstains, and why you always slept with a blade under the pillow. You couldn't settle down. You couldn't afford to. One mistake, one person recognizing you in a market, and your whole life turned into a sprint for the nearest sewer grate. Even fellow criminals kept their distance. Thieves and smugglers were sociable. You? You were that guy who makes people disappear. They feared you, or worse, saw you as a walking liability. No one wanted to share stew with someone whose occupation could attract a mob with torches. And don't expect sympathy. You couldn't tell anyone how hard it was to sleep after silently strangling a corrupt bishop. If you talked about your job, people assumed you were either lying or dangerous, and they weren't wrong. So you kept your secrets, your scars, and your weapons to yourself. At inns, you sat in the darkest corner, back to the wall, eyes always scanning the door. You never drank too much. You never stayed more than a night. You didn't say your name unless someone paid you first. And even then, it probably wasn't your real one. Being a medieval assassin meant perfecting the art of vanishing. Not just in a crowd, but from every life you never got to have. Let's say you took the job. You planned your route, you bribed the right doorman, you disguised yourself as a very convincing chimney sweep. And then, you froze. Maybe the target turned around unexpectedly. Maybe they were with their child. Maybe you got the shakes at the worst possible moment and your knife hand trembled like a terrified squirrel. Guess what? You're now dead. Because failure, for a medieval assassin, wasn't a slap on the wrist or a bad performance review. It was a public, painful, and wildly theatrical death, often involving ropes, fire, wheels, or sharp iron devices with names like the Bonecracker's Delight. Missing the kill meant blowing the whole operation. Your target lived, and immediately told everyone that someone tried to murder them. Suddenly you weren't a shadow. You were a wanted man with a detailed description, and probably a crude sketch tacked to every tavern wall within 30 miles. And those guards you once snuck past? Now they're motivated. Sometimes it wasn't even your target you had to worry about. It was your client. If you failed, you were no longer an asset. You were a liability. Someone who could be tortured, interrogated, or worse, talk. The very people who paid you would be the first to put out a second contract, on you, and there were no second chances. No. Sorry, the blade slipped. I'll try again tomorrow. You had one shot, one moment in time, and if you blew it, the best you could hope for was to die quickly before anyone found out who hired you. Failure also meant shame, the silent, humiliating kind. You didn't just fail to kill, you failed to be invisible, to be perfect. And for assassins, perfection was survival. Anything less? Might as well paint a target on your back and start practicing your final word speech. It didn't matter how many jobs you'd done before. No one cared that you succeeded 12 times. Because in this profession, You're only as good as your last kill. And if your last kill didn't happen, you'd better start running. So you did it. The plan worked. The dagger struck true. No screams, no guards, just a clean drop to the floor and a very important person who now wasn't. Congratulations. Now run for your life. Because being a successful assassin in medieval times didn't mean sipping wine on a rooftop while the city burns behind you. It meant fleeing through back alleys with someone's blood on your boots and a dog already sniffing your trail. There was no victory lap, no post-job drink with colleagues, no casual debrief with your client. You didn't even get a moment to admire your work. The moment your blade struck, your new job became escaping everyone who now wants to murder you in increasingly creative ways. Guards, coming, doors, locked, horses, tied up on the other side of town. You, probably bleeding. You had to plan your exit before the kill. Routes, disguises, fallback safe houses. Maybe a boatman who owed you a favour, or at least didn't ask questions. Because the city would go on lockdown within minutes. No one wanted a scandal. And lockdown meant closed gates, armed checkpoints, and a dozen angry men with swords who all just received your rough sketch and the phrase, maybe armed and extremely stabby. And let's talk about the client. Assuming they actually planned to pay you, they weren't going to meet you at a cosy tavern with a smile and a thank you card. They'd probably vanish too, because an assassin who just completed a job is the most dangerous person alive. You knew too much. You'd proven you could get into places others couldn't. So even when you succeeded, you walked away with coin in one hand and a giant target on your back. And what did you win? A week of sleeping in haylofts, bribing ferry captains, shaving your beard in the dark, and pretending your name was Brother Lucian as you tried to blend in with monks heading east. Because success didn't mean survival. It meant starting the whole game over. In a new city, under a new name, with even more people looking for you this time. So yes, you made the kill. Now, run like hell. If being a medieval assassin wasn't already miserable enough, poor, hunted, and sleeping in places that smelled like goat, you also had to deal with the wonderfully creative paranoia of the people around you. Because in the Middle Ages, assassins weren't just feared, they were considered cursed. To the average peasant, you weren't just a killer in a hood. You were some unholy creature who whispered to demons and smeared frog guts on your blade under a full moon. Why else would you be able to sneak past guards and vanish in the dark? Logic wasn't exactly popular back then. But superstition? Oh, that was everywhere. Some believed assassins could shapeshift. Others claimed you were invisible unless bathed in holy water. One popular tale suggested assassins made pacts with forest spirits and could breathe death through walls. Imagine walking through a village and hearing a woman mutter, "Don't make eye contact, he might hex the baby." Even your tools were suspect. Carrying a dagger, clearly it was forged in a cursed forge. Using poison, that wasn't chemistry, that was witchcraft, and you probably stirred it with a severed toe under a blood moon. You'd think this fear might help you. After all, people avoided you, right? But the reality was worse. Superstitious mobs don't hesitate. They don't ask questions. They throw stones, set fires, and shout things like, "Burn him before he calls lightning." Your reputation made people overreact. The second someone died unexpectedly, illness, accident, choking on a chicken bone, someone would whisper, maybe it was a shadow man. Maybe it was him. You could be hunted just for existing in the same village as a suspicious death. That meant you had to keep moving. Always. Stay too long, and suddenly a priest is ringing a bell while 5 angry farmers hold pitchforks like they've been waiting for this moment their entire lives. And heaven help you if you were caught with anything remotely weird. Dried herbs, strange coins, or even a foreign accent. That's all it took for someone to shout "sorcerer" and light a torch. In a world that believed monsters wore human faces, being too quiet, too clever, or too fast made you a threat. And in medieval logic, threats had to die, quickly, and preferably on fire. Ah, poison, the assassin's weapon of elegance. A quiet kill, no mess, no screaming, no steel on bone, just a sip, a stagger, a sigh. And done. That's the theory. In practice, poisoning someone in the Middle Ages was like trying to win a bar fight with herbal tea and a bad attitude. First off, poisons weren't reliable. You didn't have access to purified cyanide or a neat little pill labelled fast-acting doom. You had plants, mushrooms, minerals, maybe the occasional toad. You had to gather, grind and pray. And even then, it might just give the target a stomachache and a renewed commitment to his anti-assassin guard team. There was no scientific measurement. You didn't dose precisely. You eyeballed it. A pinch too little, and the noble just vomits and cancels dinner. A pinch too much, and you die from exposure before the first course is served. Also, medieval kitchens were chaotic. You couldn't just waltz in and season the soup with nightshade. You had to bribe or impersonate a cook, sneak in while no one was watching, or, worst of all, try to poison a meal that would go through 3 tasters and a dog. Yes, a dog. And if your victim was a noble, they didn't just eat food, they treated it like a military operation. Meals were tasted, blessed, and sniffed by everyone from the steward to the jester. By the time the food hit their plate, it had passed through more security than a royal wedding. Even assuming you did it, you slipped in the poison, it wasn't detected, and the target actually ate it. The next part was wildly unpredictable. Some poisons took hours. Some took days. 1 minute your mark is laughing at a joke, the next he's clutching his stomach and demanding to see his astrologer. And if they survived, guess who they'd blame? Not the cook, not the taster. You, the quiet man with the herbal knowledge and twitchy eyes. So poisoning wasn't efficient. It was risky, slow, and full of variables, none of them in your favour. And if you were caught, you didn't get a quick death. You got interrogated, with tools, until you confessed to poisoning everyone from the Duke to the dog. You'd think that if you successfully changed the course of history by removing a tyrant, sabotaging a royal bloodline, or silencing a political threat, someone would remember your name. Nope. You were an assassin. That meant your name was never meant to be remembered. At best, you were a rumour. Some hooded figure, a foreigner with cold eyes, or the quiet man who never finished his ale. You might have pulled off the most legendary hit of the century, and still ended up as a mysterious death in the official record. In fact, that was the point. Your client didn't want a story. They wanted plausible deniability. The fewer people who knew who did it, the safer they were, and the less likely they were to end up poisoned by their own assassin. So your name was buried the moment the job was done, if you even used a real one. You didn't sign your work. You didn't brag. You didn't keep trophies. You didn't exist outside the moment of the kill. And if someone did know your name, that was a loose end. And in your profession, loose ends had a very short shelf life. And forget about honour. There were no medals for silence. No stone monuments for the man who stopped a war with one dagger in the night. If a noble wanted a statue, they commissioned one for themselves. You got a wooden box, an unmarked grave, or if things went really badly, a head on a spike labelled traitor. Sometimes your name was known only so it could be cursed. You'd become a whispered warning. Don't cross the king. Remember what happened to Lord Ulrich? Yes. And the man who did it? Gone. Like a ghost. That was your legacy. Not fame. Not fear. Just absence. You weren't supposed to leave a mark. You were supposed to vanish. And if you stuck around long enough to be known, that was a fatal mistake. Because in the medieval world, heroes got remembered. Assassins got erased. So you survived. You got the job done. You even managed to get paid. A miracle in itself. Now all you have to do is lay low, keep your head down, and trust that your client will honour the deal and protect your identity. Right? Wrong. Because in the world of medieval assassination, there was one rule even more sacred than don't get caught. Never trust anyone, especially the person paying you. Your client